Should we watch this video from Sticks as well? This kind of fits. It's a perfect video to watch. Considering, after all this time of watching the videos talking about Tower of Fantasy, especially from Sticks, because he seems to hate the game, I actually played the game for the first time yesterday, and we're going to play it again after we've watched some videos. But let's see what he's got to say. Is Tower of Fantasy killing their game? And just a little thing just before we get into the video. I've enjoyed what I've played at Tower of Fantasy so far as well. I've actually had fun with it. So if that continues is another thing. I don't know. Let's see what he's got to say.
Is Tower of Fantasy killing their game? That is a question that I have been asked on stream. That is a question I have been asked in the comments of my Neverness To Everness videos. That is a question I have been asked on Discord, on Twitter. People have been speculating that the devs shifting their...
Dude, people were hating on the character models in this game. Worst time to pause, because they don't look great there, do they? But dude, I think I'm just easily pleased. Like, I thought the characters look really good in this game, aren't
focus from Tower of Fantasy to Neverness To Everness might be...
Maybe the faces a little bit, but I think the designs, they look great.
Responsible for the death of their game. That may or may not be the case. Regardless, there is a modicum of merit to that speculation, where Punishing Grey Raven is a different kind of game to Wuthering Waves, where Honkai Star Rail is a different kind of game to Genshin Impact. Working on WoWa, working on Honkai Star Rail don't directly affect or take away players from your already pre-existing game. Tower of Fantasy and Neverness To Everness are both very similar games. They're both anime games. They're both RPGs. They're both open world. They're both action games. The only difference is one is going to be a predominantly single player experience, and the other, Tower of Fantasy, is a single player experience but with a fake MMO world. So people have been asking me, Sticks, should I begin playing Tower of Fantasy now, knowing that in the future,
Should I, Sticks? Should I? I don't know what he's going to say. I think I know what he's going to say. Well, actually, I don't. But that question for me is easy. Just check it out. It's free. Just if you're worried that potentially the game's going to end service or it's not going to get the updates you want, just don't spend money on it. That's the great thing about free-to-play games. I see a lot of people saying that. Oh, is it worth checking this game out? Like, especially with the new one coming out, are they going to continue supporting it? Is it going to, is it going to die? And it's like, well, it's free, man. Unless you don't want to waste your time spending a bit of time on it, just check the game out, for God's sake.
Tower of Fantasy probably is going to get shafted by the devs. And while I have always told people, do not let anyone directly affect your opinion, don't let them affect your ability to try a game, to download and play it.
Too many people do that. Let reviews dictate whether they try a game out. I'll see so many people in comment sections being like, I was about to try the game out, but after you've said that, probably going to skip it now. And it's just like, why, dude? Why?
Yourself. And I strongly urge you to, if you're interested in playing Tower of Fantasy, go ahead and play Tower of Fantasy. Now is the perfect time to do so. 4.0
this character is well designed.
A month or two ago. 4.1, I think, also just very recently rolled out. You literally lose nothing by trying it. And I've always said Tower of Fantasy is a fun game. It was the developers that I thought were incompetent. I do think that having two games that are so similar to one another could directly affect the other. Could be.
I don't think they're that similar personally, in my opinion. I get what he's saying, that, they're a lot more similar than Genshin is to Star Rail, and a lot more similar than PGR is to Wuthering Waves. I get that. They're both open world. They're both action orientated. But I suppose, but at the same time, I feel like you're always kind of cannibalizing your other games in this space anyway, because they're gacha games. People have only got so much time to be bothered with doing dailies, to doing, to building characters, to bothering with the gacha system. And at the end of the day, these devs care the most about engaging with the gacha system. So I think, people have only got so much they can spend. And most people tend to have the one gacha game, if they do spend, that they spend on. And the rest are kind of free to play or really, really light spenders,
Be a detriment and could inhibit the success of each respective game. Where I think Punishing Grey Raven and Wuthering Waves, where I think Genshin Impact, Star Rail, and Zenless all work, is that they are all contrastingly different games.
I agree with that. That is true, though. They are totally different games, They all complement each other in the sense that they're, again, as I said, especially, I think it's really smart what Hoyo did with Genshin, Star Rail, and Zenless, because you've got your open world action game, you've got your linear turn-based game, and then you've got your instanced action game that kind of has this like semi sort of manual combat system that's simple yet nuanced, that like, again, it's kind of a weird take, but I feel like fits right in between the two games because it kind of lends itself to both in a way. I feel like people who play Star Rail will get something out of Zenless Zone Zero, and people who play Genshin will get something out of it as well, because it kind of like it crosses over really well, in my opinion.
People that want to play a turn-based, story-driven, segregated RPG will enjoy that in Star Rail. People that want to play an open-world action RPG will enjoy that in Genshin Impact. People that want to play a semi-instanced, semi-dungeon crawler game like Zenless will opt to go play Zenless. While they are...
And I think a lot of people will play all as well. I think this is why it's about, if you're going to have multiple games, is making them complement each other, having them be separate enough that they're different, so people feel that they're getting something extra or something new. But at the same time, you just got to stagger the updates. So when you've had, because the gacha games are cyclical, when you've got your little bit of a, you know, new banner, your new bit of content, your new end game or whatever, you play that, you get something out of it, you build your new character, you complete some content, and that's done, and you've got nothing to do, and then boom, literally the next game's got its new update, you do the same in that game, done, and then you go into the new game. Hoyo was smart with that, and I think we'll have another Hoyo game soon, where literally every single week there'll be a major update for each game, so you're constantly jumping from each Hoyo game to the other, and it keeps you in the Hoyo space. I think other games are trying to get onto that, where they kind of keep people going backwards and forwards between the games. Of course, nobody's probably going to do it as well as what Hoyo have managed to do it, but I think that's what they're trying to go for, and I do think these guys have probably come to the conclusion that maybe, you know, Tower of Fantasy is potentially on its last legs, because it has dropped off in most regions, hasn't it? So it's smart to move on to another game and maybe not branch too far away from it, because they're not necessarily trying to have two games that are different enough that they can sit together. This one's kind of dropping off, so let's create something that had all the elements that people liked about this old one, but it's just better overall, you know?
All Hoyo games, and while they all will share a degree of the same player base, they are all going to target a different demographic, therefore are not going to hinder each other's success. Now, I do definitely think that creating a game that is so similar to Tower of Fantasy could bring about the end that so many...
I guess he's kind of right, they are similar, but at the same time, I don't feel like they're that similar, but I haven't really got an argument that can discredit what he's saying, because he is kind of right.
People have been speculating, myself included, for the last year or so. I've done countless videos on Tower of Fantasy's decline. It has been in a perpetual state of decline, pretty much.
And that's why, again, I think it makes sense for them to make a new game that's kind of similar, because there was a lot of things people liked about Tower of Fantasy, wasn't there, from what I've seen anyway. It was just how it was handled, and then other issues in the game, power creep, and a myriad of other issues that I don't understand because I've literally just started playing the game. But it makes sense then to be like, okay, we're not really having our two games compete with each other because one's kind of like about to drop off the map here, or kind of already has, it's just clinging on by a finger. So let's kind of just take all of the things that were good from it and hopefully not repeat the bad things within this game. So they're not really in that conundrum of, okay, we need to make it totally different to the game that we've got, because, you know, Hoyo have got 3 games that are booming, so they kind of need to differentiate. Same with Kuro. PGR still doing really well, so they don't really want to make another game that cannibalizes PGR and kills it. It's the same as if they release another game now. They don't want to make another open world fantasy action combat game because it would cannibalize Wuthering Waves, wouldn't they? Because they're doing well, they're successful, but Tower of Fantasy is not really in that realm at the moment, is he?
Since the launch globally, WoW still does make enough money to be considered a moderate success. While there are still tens of thousands of players playing every single month, a large percentage of Neverness to Everness's community is going to be at least initially comprised, or maybe in the long term, comprised of dedicated...
Maybe in the long term, but I don't think initially. I think this game is going to consist of a lot of Wuthering Waves players and a lot of Hoyo players at the end of the day, because Hoyo's so big. If you play most of the other gacha games, there's going to be people who don't touch Hoyo games, but I think if you play a lot of other gacha games, you probably play Hoyo games as well, you know? Because they're just so big and they are the big dog that you're going to have at least probably tried them. So I think most of the player base initially is going to be from the other games. You're going to have a lot of Zenless Zone Zero players coming over to try it. You're going to have Genshin players coming over to try it. You're going to have Wuthering Waves players coming over to try it. Whether they stay is a different thing, because I think, obviously, majority of the Tower of Fantasy players have left, so they're probably in Wu-Wa or back in Genshin or in Star Rail, you know what I mean? So, I don't know if I agree with that statement so much.
Tower fantasy players. From what I've seen of Neverness to Everness, I pointed out the flaws in the trailers that I've seen thus far. I think Neverness looks like a vastly superior version of Tower Fantasy. With this in mind, if you have the same dev team and you're pushing out a game that is so similar, with the exception of the people that don't want to abandon their game because of the financial investment they have put into it, who is honestly going to prefer the old dated game when you have something newer, something better? Hada have proven time and time again that they really don't want people to play Tower Fantasy. They allow you to skip so much of the story, so many of the areas.
I think that's just a freedom of choice in gacha games that I think a lot of people want now, isn't it? You know, that's one thing that people love to roast Genshin over, is the lack of ability to skip. You know, you can do a lot of that in Wuthering Waves. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's a bad game. I just think it's people who play gacha games a lot of the time don't really care about the story. They just want to get into the action. Now, I'm not saying that doesn't mean that there's some problems with the story in the game. I haven't experienced it yet. I've literally just started the game, so I can't really comment on that.
Because they're just embarrassed by it. It's humiliating for them to have such an inferior version of the game be playable. And while I think Neverness to Everness could be a fantastic game if the devs listen to player feedback and they're not caught stealing or plagiarizing, I don't think that they're going.
See, like, I'm one of those people, again, I've said this multiple times, I couldn't give a damn if developers are caught stealing or plagiarizing. And I know a lot of people disagree with that from a moral standpoint, a legal standpoint, all that. But at the end of the day, if I get a good game, I don't care if it's copied fucking another game's homework. I really do not care, as long as the game's better and it's an enjoyable concept for me. If the game isn't good, then there's, you know, then you can all go, you copied his homework and you still got an F. But yeah, at the end of the day, that sort of stuff doesn't bother me, really.
Going to necessarily run into the same issue. The issue, of course, being horrendous storytelling. The inability to grasp, to grip, to enthrall, to retain player attention and retention. I don't know.
And that's a fair comment as well, because it is on a game developer to pull you in right away, to grab your attention and to retain your attention, as he said. Again, this is what I was saying before when I disagreed with what Tech Tom was saying before about Zenless Zone Zero, about people being a bit too quick to judge a game. Now, if you're reviewing a game, I think you have to play a good chunk of a game. If it's a live service, you have to have played majority of the content, or at least got through, you know, the main chunk of a story or something and got to endgame or whatever, you know, whatever the percentage is. I'm not going to go into that. Or if it's a story game, you've got to have finished the game, really. But if you're just giving your opinion on a game in a video or on a tweet, I think if you play 15 minutes of a game, 20 minutes of a game, and you just don't like it, you're just not feeling it, I think it's fair to say, yo, story sucked in my opinion, and I didn't like the gameplay. Now, you might play more of it if you were forced to and change your mind. That might be a thing, but I still think it's a fair point to say that. And I think it is up to a game, and it is on the developers to pull you in. And I understand that some games have a slow simmer, a slow start. I get that. But at the same time, it is still on them to encourage you to want to stick around, even though it's a slow start, you know?
Single person that plays or has played
What's going on, Fab?
Fantasy and says the story is great. I don't know anyone that says I am so enthralled with this world that I can't play anything else. Where on the contrary, I've heard repeatedly, I got into Wuthering Waves and I can't return to Genshin. I can't return to Tower of Fantasy. Can't play.
Okay, that's a fair comment, though. That is definitely a fair comment. I've felt like that. I haven't gone back to Genshin, and I'm kind of like, even though I'm not a hardcore Genshin player anyway, I'm still so freaking behind on Genshin, and I came to the party late as well. But I kind of don't want to go back to Genshin, because I just feel like it's going to feel so jank and just not fun. I've only played a couple of hours of Tower of Fantasy so far, and I'm enjoying it, but at the same time, I dropped my expectations a little bit because of what I've heard. And two, Wuthering Waves' combat is just so good. I just know that at the moment, nothing's kind of living up to that. So I kind of reel my expectations back a little bit, and I'm having fun with it. And I can definitely say the combat's nowhere near as good as what it is in Wuthering Waves, at least anyway so far. I'm having fun with it.
Play anything else because I miss the ability to grapple. I miss the ability to wall climb. I miss the phenomenal action combat that WoW has. I just think having the same developers create essentially the same game, but an updated version of it is going to 100% unequivocally be a detriment to Tower of Fantasy. It's going to happen. They're going to appeal to the same market, and players are going to be stuck.
I suppose that's hard to say. He's not wrong. He's not wrong, because I think there'll be people who play Tower of Fantasy, especially free-to-play players, who will be like, well, I'm just going over to the new thing. But at the same time, I think a lot of the Tower of Fantasy players have left anyway, haven't they? So they're already playing something else anyway. So if you have had a bunch of customers, and you've lost 90% of your customers, and they've gone over to your rival, and then you're like, right, let's create this new thing. Isn't it better to get that 90% back from your rivals and lose the 10% that you had left on your other thing and have a nice customer base again? I'm sure that's worth cannibalizing your own product if you're going to gain the majority of your previous customers back, isn't it?
Between an old dated game that honestly looks like it came out in 2010 versus a game that looks like it could almost compete with Genshin Impact graphically. I know a lot of Tower of Fantasies.
What? I think this game looks better than Genshin Impact graphically. Like Genshin Impact is very pretty because it's incredibly oversaturated, and the colors, and it's got this like almost watercolor painting look, which I am a big fan of art aesthetically from the art style point. The game looks gorgeous, but I think fidelity wise and art style wise, I kind of like this a little bit more. Now, I'd say the art style is a little bit more, what's the word, at the forefront in Genshin, and it'll probably age better because I've had this discussion a bunch of times. Fidelity ages a lot faster than art style, but I think this game looks great, man. I think it looks better than Genshin in my opinion.
Revenue is made on PC. A lot of people claim the same about Wuthering Waves, and it's not possible right now to gauge how much revenue for WoW is actually earned via PC, but we have a semblance of an idea for Tower Fantasy. We have seen the mobile revenue, according to Sensor Tower, continue to decline over the course of the last year, which means in theory, if the mobile revenue is declining, so is the PC revenue. Hada are no doubt well aware of this and are putting everything they can into Neverness because
exactly, that's my point again. So why would they worry necessarily about cannibalizing that ever-decreasing audience? It's better to have them in your new game and be your customers than going to your rivals and spending money on your rivals, surely, right?
not only does Neverness look like a far superior game, but it is probably going to also appeal to a much larger demographic of player, because you remove the MMO aspect, and I think a lot more people would have been happy with Tower of Fantasy. I think it releasing as an MMO definitely damaged its ability to garner that same total player retention, the maximum number of players that are interested in that kind of world. Looking at WoW, looking at Genshin, one of the reasons that they are so popular is...
Although I do just want a really good anime MMO. I thought Blue Protocol was going to be it, but it seems like even that's not going to happen now in the West, and it seems to be doing really badly in its Asian release, and they seem to be just handling it really badly as well, and it sucks because every time I look at Blue Protocol, I'm like, dude, the game looks so freaking gorgeous, and I just want a good MMO anime game.
Is because they don't rely on the multiplayer. And honestly, as someone that repeatedly...
I agree, yeah, he does go hard on Tower of Fantasy sometimes. Even when, like, the video's not talking about Tower of Fantasy, dude's just like, oh, hold up a second, let me just shit on Tower of Fantasy.
Tried to engage...
Kind of makes me laugh, though, at the same time.
...multiplayer content that I was forced into as a direct result of Tower of Fantasy being an MMO. It sucked. Removing that MMO aspect might make for a much better game. Will probably make for a much better game. So at the end of the day, what I'm getting at here is, if you're interested in playing Tower of Fantasy, go ahead and play it. It's a great time to. Neverness to Everness probably isn't releasing for another year, another 2 years. You got plenty of time to play Tower of Fantasy right now. I think Neverness is going to
Dude, I was actually like, when I seen him get into the car, or her get into the car, I was like, holy shit, dude. They've put GTA in this, like, you know, and the modifications as well. I can't wait to play this game.
100% replace Tower of Fantasy. both
I suppose it is just an evolution, though, because of the mounts and vehicles in Tower of Fantasy, isn't it, really?
in terms of being a direct moneymaker for Hada, being their cash cow, and for being the game that players want to play as a part of Hada's community. It's going to happen. It's just better. That doesn't mean Tower Fantasy is bad. It just means it's not as good. And when given the opportunity between something really good and something that isn't, why would you play the lesser?
At the end of the day, though, this game could be hot doo-doo when it launches. We don't know yet. It looks great, but, you know, let's not pretend that the gaming industry hasn't burned us many times. So I think we should wait and see first.
Of the two games, you wouldn't.
I am looking forward to it,
At the
though.
end of the day,
Sorry for keep pausing it. This is my most anticipated upcoming gacha game.
an answer to everyone that continues to ask me, is Tower of Fantasy dying or is it dead? No, it's not dead yet, but Neverness probably will be the thing that kills it.
I don't agree with that, actually. I don't agree with that. I don't think a new game coming out from Hada will kill Tower of Fantasy. When I think if people wanted what, you know, I think if people wanted what Neverness To Everness is going to give them out of Tower of Fantasy without the MMO elements, Wuthering Waves would have killed it, in my opinion. Or those people would have just gone back to Genshin. I think Tower of Fantasy probably had its issues because of, I don't know exactly why, because I haven't played the game, but things I've heard in mismanagement, the power creep, story issues, you know, a myriad of other issues as well. I don't necessarily think Hada bringing out another game that's somewhat similar in some regard is going to be the nail in the coffin. I just don't, and I think even if it is, then that's better than it going to your competitors, isn't it, really? But I just don't think it will be. But yeah, another video from Sticks. I do watch a lot of Sticks because I tend to find out about new gacha games. But dude definitely has some serious beef with Tower of Fantasy. But at the same time, I find it funny, though, if I'm honest. So you definitely check out Sticks if you haven't already. Show him some love.